Righteous people can make a complete and utter ruin of their lives when they get too comfortable with sin. Now, the whole Bible is a record of God's mercy and love towards mankind. It's a love letter, if you like. There are nevertheless passages that shock or offend us with their bluntness. And this is one of them. The temptation for us, or the temptation for me, would be to move on quickly and pretend not to notice. The way you might speed up and cross the road when you want to avoid an annoying neighbour or colleague. But these accounts have been included in the Bible for a very important reason: to warn us of the incredible danger that this world and our own corrupt natures can present. So we're going to look seriously at it, even if we are flinching as we do so. Like any medicine, it might not taste pleasant, but it will do us good if we take it. And I'll just add, was it yesterday or the day before, Friday, I listened to an excellent sermon on this passage by a friend of mine who's a pastor down in London. He preached it at the assembly. I'll probably send it out on WhatsApp, and you can ask me if you're not on the WhatsApp and you want a link to that. And I'll say he'll probably rough you up more than I'm going to. But he's a Londoner, so he gets to. This morning, we're going to compare the men of Sodom and Lot. That's all we're doing. A little compare and contrast exercise. The men of Sodom and Lot. Well, let's start by thinking about the men of Sodom. Now, the whole context for this story, like we saw back in chapter 18, is these two angels, because there was three men, if you remember. That seems to be the Lord and two angels, or they're all manifestations of God in some way, going on a fact-finding mission to Sodom. They're seeing if the reality of the situation in that city is as bad as the news that has reached God, the outcry against the place that's been heard. If it is, they're going to destroy the place. They will bring ruin on that city. Now, that's a clue, because there are verbal links that tie this section back to the flood account in chapter 6. That word ruin, it's the same word that's used, and interestingly enough, when the angels shut the door, same phrase used when God shut the door on the ark. We're given the impression that, as with the flood, things have gotten so bad in Sodom. The wickedness is so dangerous, it is so destructive, that God isn't going to put up with it anymore. Like a cancer, he's going to cut it out before it does any more harm. So straight away, we should be thinking about the seriousness of sin. We just jump right in at the deep end in this passage. The world might think that it's okay to put up with a little wrongdoing. You know, we've got this word, it comes, it's all kinds of wrong, but it comes out of Roman Catholic theology, peccadillo, which means a lesser sin, and we mean like it's just a little peccadillo. It doesn't mean anything, it's just a little sin. What does it really matter? But we know, don't we, and we talk about it often enough, sin is an offence to God. It stinks. He knows how much it twists people who are made in his image out of shape. And I think we talk about it often enough, but we often talk as if the worst thing about sin is that it's odious to God. Almost as if it was arbitrary, that he just set a load of random rules and said, you can do this and you can't do this, and it's that way because I say so. And then when you sin, well, you've broken his arbitrary rules and he's offended by that. That's not what it's like. He hates sin because of the damage it does to people made in his image, because he loves people made in his image. Sin destroys the objects of God's love. That's why he hates it. He sees a full picture of the havoc it wreaks on individuals and communities. Well, as this account unfolds, we see how bad things in Sodom have gotten. Not long after the angels are welcomed, and you get the impression there's a bit of haste here. He's like, come on, quick. Into Lot's house, an unruly mob gathers outside. Every man in Sodom, it seems, turns out. Now, we're being shown, aren't we, how deep set this rot is. Young and old, from every part of the city, from every station in society. It doesn't maybe mean that every single person with XY chromosomes was there. It just means people from every part of the city. There is no one, no people group, no subclass left out. This is a representative selection of the city. And maybe it does just mean every man with, every XY chromosome, every biological male is present. Could be, for all we know. If you remember Abraham's bargaining back in chapter 18 and God's promise that he would spare even this town, he would spare it for the sake of as few as 10 righteous men. If you can find 10 righteous men, he won't destroy the city. But reading this, our hearts should sink, shouldn't they? Because if this is every man in the city, there is not even 10. This city will not be spared. And what does this mob want to do? Maybe you heard me censoring it a little bit, using the older language for the sake of some of the younger people. It's horrendous, isn't it? We're talking about a gang rape. They want to shame and violate these visitors. Now, that's offensive enough. Anyone these days, I think, is offended by that. There's no real question about that. Even in our society, this is not cool. This is not appropriate. This is evil behavior. But we can't quite appreciate how offensive this will be to ancient readers. Because not only is it clear in the Bible that homosexual sexual activity is sin, but this is a violation of the laws of hospitality. You wouldn't have to be Jewish. That's the interesting thing here, because there were differing views in the ancient world on homosexuality. If it was between consenting adults, outside of the Jewish community, people were like, they were okay with it. The Jewish law made clear that it's sin and it's not acceptable. But even to people who thought that it was okay between consenting adults, these are evil men, and they acknowledge that. By anyone's standards, this is not good. And it just seems to get worse. The hearts of the men of Sodom are visible here, aren't they? It's like you can see right to the bottom of what they're like. They're so given over to their sin, to their wickedness, that even when the angels strike them with blindness, rather than realize the evil of what they're doing, rather than turning back and repenting, and friends, some of us have maybe experienced this. My friend Steve, he talks about it in this sermon that I'll link you to. Sometimes God just whacks us because we're going down a dangerous route. And so we get a loving spank. And we're turned away from the way we're going. And we acknowledge, God, that hurt. But it's doing me good. You discipline me because you love me. Well, here they're blinded, and yet they carry right on with what they're doing. In their lust, they're groping around for the door. You see, they can't find the door. Why can't they find the door? Because they're still looking for it. They're still wanting to carry out their threats, even in their blindness. And we see it underlined when Lot tries to warn his sons-in-law of the danger. Some of you may be wondering, well, if he's got 2 virgin daughters, how does he have son-in-law? Does he have more daughters that we don't hear about? Well, just in the ancient world, marriage was kind of a 2-stage process. So you would get betrothed, and that was like proper marriage. You then got a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law, and then at a later point, the husband would come and take the wife to his home, and that's then the consummation. They've sort of done the 2-stage part of the marriage. So he's betrothed his daughters, but they've not yet gone to live with their husbands. That's the situation. And Lot tries to warn them. We wonder, don't we, are they part of the crowd or not? Are they there sort of blindly wandering around outside, or were they perhaps not present? We don't know. But when Lot says in verse 14, hurry and get out of this place because the Lord is about to destroy the city, he couldn't say it any plainer, could he? They think it's laughable. That's perhaps a better translation than they thought he was joking. That's not bad, but it's not that they think he's having them on. Oh, that's a good one, Lot. You know. It's that they think he's crackers. What he's saying to them is so ludicrous, it makes them laugh. Like they're saying, pull the other one, Lot, it's got bells on. They can't even entertain the idea that there is a holy God who will call everyone to answer for the choices that they've made. They just can't even entertain it. Wanton and unnatural desires are the evidence of a society given over by God to judgment. Now, Paul tells us that in Romans 1:24 through 27. And we see that, and I'm not just talking about sexual sins. There's lots of things that if you think about it, it's just unnatural. Like the desire to sort of enjoy our lives by killing our children. That's unnatural, isn't it? It is a sign of a society given over to judgment, where a society keeps rejecting God's mercy. Eventually, God lets us have it our own way. If we keep telling God we don't want him, eventually he says, fine. And just see what happens. It is a terrible, terrible thing. For justice to be done, remember that God is a God of justice. We want justice. Everyone wants justice. But a time has to come when God's mercy stops being available and he serves judgment. The sentence will be passed and carried out. Now, God gives opportunity to repent. That's what this time now is. That's why the world hasn't ended. He is compassionate and gracious, says Exodus 34, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. A time comes when his love is rejected for the final time and the axe falls. Are there any of us this morning who need to learn this lesson from the men of Sodom? Well, secondly, let's think about Lot. We've seen the villains of our tale, so let's meet the hero. You can tell I'm being facetious, can't you? But this is how Lot is sort of presented, isn't it? And it's a parallel to the last chapter where you've got Abraham, and he's clearly a righteous man. And here, Lot, he's a righteous guy. He's the one righteous person in Sodom, it seems. The last righteous man in Sodom. That's how the New Testament describes him, by the way. So the Bible talks about this. 2 Peter 2, verse 7 says, Lot was a righteous man who was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless. I mean, we see it in his behavior. He welcomes the angels, and he does it with great respect. He does all the right things. He doesn't know who they are, and yet with all proper decorum, he insists with impeccable manners that they stay with him, and he provides a feast. The word in Hebrew means feast. He doesn't just give them a meal. It's the same word as when Abraham gave a feast. And you think, well, Abraham did give a feast. There was, loads and loads more bread they could eat, and there was meat, whereas Lot just gives them like a few pita breads. It doesn't seem anywhere near as lavish as the one that Abraham gave him in the last chapter, but bear in mind, it's past bedtime, and Lot prepares it himself. So he's providing them a meal. He's making sure that they're fed. He's fulfilling his duties as host. And then when the mob gathers, at great personal risk, Lot goes out by himself to try and calm them down, doesn't he? He speaks respectfully to the men of Sodom. He calls them brothers. He says, brothers, don't do this terrible thing. He makes every effort to protect the honor of his household and that of the city by defending its guests. I mean, would you want to shut the door behind you if you went out to a mob like that? That takes courage, doesn't it? It's something easy to overlook given our culture, but Lot is trying to prevent them bringing dishonour on their town. We're not as much of an honour and shame culture. The ancient Israelites and other ancient peoples were. It's an honour-shame thing. He's got the community's interests at heart as well as his own. We see that in how he tries to warn his sons-in-law. You know, according to the family dynamics of the time, he has no duty to warn them at all. They form a different, separate family unit. It's something Lot seems to do for his daughter's sake, because he loves them and because he's a good guy and he's concerned about his sons-in-law. Only something's not quite right with this, is it? Lot is introduced here as the righteous player in the story. Only how did he try and defend his guests? How does he try and defend their honour? By offering his daughters in their place. Now, by the standards of the time he lived, that is a less odious thing to do. But it's still horrible, isn't it? I don't think we have words to describe it. And by the way the rest of this chapter goes, it's clear that Lot doesn't get away with this statement. It doesn't say that was a good thing to offer. Just look at what happens to his family. He should not have said that. He should not have thought it. He should not have offered it. Reading ahead a little here. In verse 16, we see Lot hesitate, even as judgment is about to fall on Sodom. There's something up with this picture. And as we piece it together, we start to make sense of it. Now, it's obvious from the words of the men of Sodom in verse 9 that Lot is seen as a foreigner and an outsider. He's not one of them. He's always kept himself slightly different, slightly distant from them. And it doesn't take much to bring all their prejudice and hatred to the surface. Like many descendants of Abraham since, it doesn't take much. They seem to be doing quite well in their communities, and then suddenly there's a pogrom and they're being wiped out. But where did we meet our hero in this tale? Because it's telling. Look at verse 1. The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. Well, the gateway of the city, if you don't know, it was the place where the civic leaders, the elders and merchants of a town would meet to do business and hold court. It was kind of the equivalent of the town hall or the magistrates' court or the chambers of commerce, all kind of mixed into one. And Lot looks very comfortable there, doesn't he? Now, it can't have been hidden from him how bad the people of Sodom were. In fact, that's what the New Testament says. He was tormented in his righteous soul by the deeds he saw and heard. So he knew what was going on. He knew what the people of Sodom were like. We read it in chapter 13. The people of Sodom were wicked and sinning greatly against the law. But for the sake of the financial benefits, do you remember he chose to live there? Abraham said, choose for yourself where you'll go and I'll go the other way. And Lot saw the plain of the Jordan and Sodom and Gomorrah there, and he thought, look at that. I could live there. I can do well there. And Lot had pitched his tent there. It didn't take him long. In fact, I think it's just one chapter before he was living cheek by jowl with the wicked. And he even gave his daughters to be married to them. He saw that these people were sinning greatly against the Lord, and he said, my family can marry into that. I see no issue with that. Now, it's not for us to stand in judgment on Lot, but I will say this. He'd gotten settled in Sodom, hadn't he? His standards that he'd been taught by Abraham had slipped, even if he is tormented in his righteous soul for all the good that does. Now, this is what makes me very uneasy. Because one of the greatest dangers to the church in the Western world is how comfortable we are. We've got houses and cars and nice clothes, and not just food, but we've got M&S food. If we judge ourselves by our neighbours who don't know God, then we're definitely more righteous than them. So we persuade ourselves that we're doing all right. But how much of Sodom has rubbed off on us? I'm asking myself, I'm not just asking you, I'm asking myself this. How far short of God's standards have we fallen? How compromised are we? Would the people around us have any reason to listen to us? Or like Lot, would they just say, who do you think you are to judge us? Rather than calling on the people around us to turn away from the way of death and embrace life in Christ, are we just getting by and keeping our mouths shut because we don't want to upset the comfortable status quo, or even because it might get us in trouble? You might lose your job. Sin is an evil and a poisonous thing, and like a disease, it is infectious. Are there any of us this morning who need to learn this lesson from Lot? Lot. Well, if we compare the men of Sodom and Lot, it's obvious, isn't it? The Lot is by far the more righteous. I mean, it's not much of a comparison to make. Like, anyone could look good compared to them. But it's also really obvious when we compare Lot to Abraham that Lot's righteousness really isn't much to boast about. He is compromised substantially. However much it offends him, he is too comfortable with the sin around him. And it has started to rub off on him. I've got bad news and good news this morning. The bad news is that the standard that God holds us to isn't just to compare us to the people around us. It's not even to compare us to Lot or Abraham or any other Sunday school hero. The standard is Jesus. The standard is perfection, because God is holy. And that's a standard that will always leave us guilty, condemned, and facing a terrible judgment. But the good news is the same good news that we preach every Sunday. That though we are unrighteous, every one, that God has made his righteousness, the righteousness of God, available through Jesus. Only through Jesus. But it's available. It's on offer. It is not too high that we can't reach it. It's not unknown to us that we don't know where to look for it. Whoever you are, whatever you've done, whatever lifestyle you are living, you can be saved. You can be cleansed and counted by God as one of his precious children, looked on with the same esteem as he looks on the Lord Jesus Christ. This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased. That will be said of you if you are his. Whatever mistakes you've made, and we've all made mistakes, haven't we? Whether you're a permanent resident in Sodom or one of God's elect exiles sojourning there for a time, perhaps getting a little too comfortable with the way things are, the solution is the same. Turn to God for mercy in his Son, Jesus Christ. It's not too late today. A day will come where it is. Take the opportunity while it's available. Be washed in the blood of the Lamb. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Because whatever the world can offer you, and it offers a lot of things that we want and that we value, whatever it offers you, it can't offer you him. Let's sing our final hymn. It's number 723 in the Blue Book, 723. 2, 3. All I once held dear, built my life upon, all this world reveres and wars to own. All I once thought gain, I've counted loss. Spent and worthless now compared to this. Compared to what? Knowing Jesus. Let's stand and sing 723. All I once held dear, built my life upon, all this world reveres and wars to all I